hi, Michaela, even if we're not filming, right? Because I just want to say hi. Thank you guys so much for joining us today for this candidate forum. I'm Lee Marie. For those of you who don't know me, Lee Marie Mosca. I'm the executive director of Rosie's Place. And I'm so pleased that we are able to host this candidate forum today for Councilor at Large. So thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you to our candidates for prioritizing this conversation on your schedule. It means a lot to us that you made the time to be here and to talk with us. And I also want to thank our moderator, Sarah Betancourt. Sarah is a reporter for Commonwealth Magazine, and she covers many of the issues that impact the communities we serve. So we're really lucky to have her here today guiding our conversation. So I look forward to a great dialogue, to some good listening, and most importantly, to the action that's going to come afterwards. So thank you so much.
Hi everyone, so I'm Sarah. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Let's just jump right in. So let's walk through the forum format. Questions were sent by guests and co-sponsors and compiled into 4 issue-based questions. In lieu of opening and closing statements, we're asking that candidates introduce themselves by telling us why they're running for councilor at large. The candidates are sitting in the order they are listed in the ballot from my left to right. And we will start with responses on my left with Councilor Michael Flaherty and go from left to right. And so let's introduce Councilor Michael Flaherty. Alejandra St. Guillen, she's on her way. Councilor Wu. Aaron Murphy. Councilor Althea Garrison. David Halbert. And Councilor Anissa. All right, so let's start with the opening question. Councilor Flaherty, why are you running to remain councilor at large? And let's pass over the second microphone.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for hosting. Thank all of you for attending. It's great to be here, and this is the forum I look forward to as a candidate. I've never missed one in my time running for the Boston City Council and serving on the council. Why I would like to be reelected is because I want to continue the work that I'm doing to make Boston work for everyone. You think about Boston skyline, you see the cranes, you see the new buildings coming out, you hear about CEOs moving their companies here, but yet there's a huge disconnect. And there's an opportunity gap because a lot of that economic development is not flowing out throughout all of our neighborhoods. We also have an affordable housing crisis, and we have an opioid crisis, and we have a homeless epidemic as well. So we have some work to do. I would like to take this opportunity in this forum to listen to all of you so that we can learn what we need to do. I work for you as your citywide city councilors, so it's great for me to be up here to tell you from my vantage point what I think is working and not working. But from your lived experience, I think it would be very beneficial for us, incumbents as well as challengers, to learn more about what needs to be done in the city so that we are making sure that we're reaching everyone, we're more inclusive for everyone, that we're creating as much affordable housing, and we're solving the hunger, the homeless, and the opioid crisis. And so it's those lived experiences that I will bring back to City Hall and try to continue to work and make a difference for the lives of folks in this room and also folks across the city. So thank you for your time and attention.
And let me just briefly interject and give our forum rules. Our forum will go to 11 in the morning just because we need to change over for lunch. So please keep your responses to questions direct and to the point. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond to each question with our timekeeper. Putting up a sign for 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and time's up. Please tell us how you specifically will address the questions, answering and focusing your questions on your solutions. And finally, the forum is not a debate, so we're asking candidates not to call on each other nor respond to others' points. And with that, Councilor Wu.
Just going to stand for the opening statement so I can at least see everyone in the back right now. I'm Michelle Wu. I'm honored to serve as one of your 4 citywide at-large councilors. And I'm running because I believe that when you have people inside government who who really know what it's like outside government, that's how you create the partnerships and really change the dynamic of the structures and systems we need to change. Rosie's Place actually has a really close connection with my story of why I am in office today. I am a daughter of immigrants, and my mom gave me every bit of strength and resilience I have, but she's gone through a lot of struggle. She struggled with mental illness and had a mental health crisis that led to me learning how much government mattered, finding my way to Boston, getting involved with Rosie's Place, first as a law student in the public policy department, and then helping more and more, because I see her story reflected in so many of the guests here at Rosie's Place and this incredible organization that changes lives by giving people the respect, dignity, support that they need. That's all we want for every resident of Boston. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for being here with us.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Erin Murphy. I'm a first-time candidate, and I often get that question, why am I running? I've been a Boston public school teacher for 22 years, loving my job. So often people say, how do you make that transition, and why would you leave a job you love? So as an ESL special ed kindergarten teacher, always helping and advocating for my families and helping the families who felt like their voices didn't matter. And that's something I want to do on the city council, make sure that all families and all neighborhoods know that their voice matters. Through my own life and my lived experiences, I often felt like my voice didn't count or matter. I was a homeowner, went through a divorce after a very abusive relationship. We lost our house, ended up living with my mom for several months, and then now for the past 12 years, I've been renting with my kids in Dorchester. So I'm not a homeowner. I realized that many times in life, even if you have family and people love you, you're one event away from your life maybe falling apart. So Rosie's Place and other organizations in Boston, I think, need to be supported, and I'd be a candidate who also cares and is compassionate to all of the people in the city of Boston. So thank you for having me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Althea Garrison, and I'm running for re-election. The reason I'm running for the Boston City Council at large for re-election is because I don't feel as though the job is getting done. We have a housing crisis. No one wants to inject rent control. I'm running because I would like to see a bill that I have filed since January on rent control to see if I can get it passed if I'm given a full 2-year term. I only been on the council about 10 months, and I've filed tons of legislation. Although it's being blocked, I'm going to continue to fight for what I believe in. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing? Good. All right, that's good. My name is David Howard. I'm also one of the candidates for Boston City Council at large. And the reason I'm running is this is an extension of what I've always done. I've had a wonderful career, 15 years in public service, working at the State House, working at City Hall, working for other agencies, and had just a tremendous amount of blessings in my life. And this is about paying that forward. But it's also about recognizing what got me. You see, my mother was a single mom who found herself also after a divorce with 3 small children and trying to figure out how she was going to make those ends meet. And it was a public program, specifically the Women, Infant, and Children program, that brought a cardboard box to the front of my grandmother's house that had milk and eggs and cereal, but it also had so much more in there. In that box, there was dignity, and there was hope, and there was the ability of my family to figure out what that next step was going to be. And that was a life of her in public service, working for the Environmental Protection Agency, and an inspiration for all of myself and my sisters to do that same sort of work. So it's about bringing those experiences, those lived-in experiences, those work experiences to the table to come up with creative solutions to work with tremendous organizations like Rosie's Place and others across the city to help support everyone in Boston.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Anissa Rasavi George. I'm currently a city councilor at large and looking forward to being reelected and continuing my work, especially around homelessness, mental health, and recovery. I have some prepared remarks to share as an opening statement, but I'm going to read a letter that was shared with me just a few minutes ago from one of the women here in the room, because I think it's important as we do this work and hope to be reelected, that we continue to represent all of you. And just a few of those lines, excuse me for the glasses. We are homeless women currently staying at the Woods Mullen shelter. The Woods Mullen Shelter is a city-run shelter, and it's one that we need to do a better job paying attention to and representing. And the letter was shared with me from a group of women who fear that they would be kicked out of the shelter if their names were shared. That they are speaking for themselves, yet but speaking for the mothers and the grandmothers at the shelter, and recognizing that there are older women staying at the shelter that need to be represented and spoken for. They are disabled women, they are middle-aged, low-income women, and feeling very discouraged because there has been a focus on men, but we need to remember that there are women, and a growing number of women, who are experiencing homelessness. And I look forward to this debate forum this morning, to share more about my work on the council.
Thank you. Yeah. First of all, my apologies for being late. I was running into some childcare issues. My name is Alejandra Saint-Yang. I am also running for city councilor at large. I was born and raised in Mission Hill. My father was an immigrant from Venezuela, and my mother a hairdresser from New Hampshire. And even though that we didn't have a lot, they taught us the value of being empathetic, of being a hard worker, and pushing through on behalf of everyone. I've taken those values with me throughout my entire life. I've been a public school teacher, and a community organizer, and an advocate. And I'm excited to be on the city council because I understand firsthand trauma. I've experienced trauma as a homicide survivor. My sister was killed about 13 years ago, and I understand that the services that we need, whether it be in housing or in education, need to be laced with trauma-informed services. I'm excited to be part of City Council, to work with all of you in building a better Boston for all of us. Thank you.
Let's jump right into some of the questions. And I just want to remind everyone that you have 1 minute, and our timekeeper will keep track of that. So low-income individuals and families are struggling in Boston, and more Bostonians are experiencing housing instability, eviction, and homelessness. What actions would you take, and what investments would you support to prevent homelessness and ensure that individuals and families with low incomes can stay in their homes? And let's start with Councilor Asadi George.
Thank you very much for the question. I'm going to stand because I know there's a lot of folks in the back of the room. As chair of the Committee on Homelessness, Mental Health, and Recovery, I've spent the last almost 40 years focused on the issues around homelessness and where they often intersect with mental health, and where they sometimes intersect with addiction and substance use disorders. My work has also been especially focused on our families experiencing homelessness. As a former high school teacher in Boston, we have 5,000 students. I know of 5,000 students in the Boston Public Schools experiencing homelessness, and how we as a city need to do more and do better to support those families. I've been a lead partner and a founding member of the Family-Led Stability Pilot, which works with 7 schools in BPS to support families on the brink of homelessness and those living in shelter, and looking to create more housing opportunities within our city and close to school. The school is often a stabilizing factor for our kids and for their families. Also working with the Boston Housing Authority to make sure that the 48,000 families on the wait list for Boston Housing Authority have greater access to units in our city.
Thank you so much for the question. In regards to how we're working to prevent and work with our homeless population, a lot of it is making sure that, one, we're thinking about the totality of it. That it's not just the people that we see on the streets who obviously need all of our help and compassion and work, but also the working homeless as well. People who are out there working jobs and unfortunately unable to make ends meet in such an expensive city. So making sure that we're having a wide range of services that speak to all of us. Speaking from a housing first perspective, we know that if we can get people into housing opportunities and bring them the services that they need, it's revenue neutral in many cases. In many cases, we're actually having cost savings that way. So bringing them services around mental health, around trauma, around addiction issues, that's critically important. Making sure that those housing opportunities that we have are right-sized and family-sized as well. It's not just enough to house an individual. We have so many folks who have children who need to be housed as well. So making sure that we're doing that. And as we're thinking about all of these policies and proposals, making sure that we're wrapping it in the context of setting what our priorities are in the city budget. If we're not putting money behind these, all we're doing is putting words behind them. So we have to make sure that we're holding the city budget to account to make sure that we're providing the resources necessary to make it happen.
Question afternoon. My name is Councilor Althea Garrison. I'm running for re-election. The city council doesn't have the will to address the homeless problem. If they did, they would put a ballot question on the ballot for the city of Boston implement a rent control and eviction control. As I said in my opening statement, I have a question right now that I filed legislation to bring back rent control. They don't want to talk about rent control because a lot of them, such as Isabel George, her husband is in the real estate business. So it's obvious she's not going to support rent control. There's others that take money from the developers and they will not address rent control because they take money from these developers. I don't take money from any of them. Thank you.
So I think the homelessness problem and housing crisis in the city is probably more than twofold, but from the teacher standpoint, I think education is key, and that starting at a young age, we're offering high quality elementary school programs, schools for kids. We know many of our public schools are not giving our kids the best education they have, and investing in our Madison Park High so that our trade school is top notch. It should be world class here in the city of Boston, where we have so many colleges and unions and hospitals around, because there's so many great paying union jobs out there. Also, making sure that the city jobs that are out there are going to city kids is one thing, but on the side, the city council can do rent subsidies and rent control. All of those should be considered. New development, making sure that affordable housing is built, but what is affordable is always the question we talk about. Affordable for many would be 2-3 jobs. So making sure that we're really looking at what people can afford and making sure neighbors have a say and people are not being displaced, especially seniors. Thank you.
Hi, got here just in time, right? And I'm gonna blow everybody's ears up. I'm Julia Mejia. We were just answering the question, right? And the question is about affordability, housing,
How low-income individuals and families are struggling with housing instability and how you would support preventing homelessness.
Yeah, well, that is a long conversation coming, right? I think we've been having the same conversation for years and years and years, and we keep thinking that things are going to change, but we just keep getting more of the same, right? I think we have an opportunity to redefine what is affordable in the city of Boston and create opportunities to look at the AMI, which is the area median income, more through a hyper-local way, and looking at what is the Boston median area income, looking directly at what it looks like for people who live in Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, as opposed to people who live in Jamaica Plain in the South End and other parts of the city of Boston, right? So making that more hyper-local. And then I also think that for me, I'm pushing for 50% IDP, which is for affordable housing, is the Inclusionary Development policy. I think that we need to build more affordable housing. Right now it's set at 13%. I don't believe we need incremental change. We need to have change that reflects the city of Boston, and having more affordable housing units is what's really gonna get us out of this housing crisis. And we have over 5,000 students in the city of Boston who are homeless, and we need to be bolder and louder about what we're gonna do to make sure that none of us get left behind. And I'm Julia Mejia. I'm the in the back.
Our housing crisis is just so big right now and getting bigger and bigger. We know that more than half of the people in the city of Boston can't afford to think about when they might one day purchase a home, and that the stress of that is not just about the finances, which are deep, but it affects every other part of your life, how you're thinking about your kids, your time with your family, your emotional and mental health. And so this is a problem that needs the highest urgency from government. And I think the solution, there's lots of policy tools we can talk about around tenant stability, around rent control and rent stabilization, around increasing funding for affordable housing. But most of all, I think it's about listening to the people who are experiencing this. So the first thing that I did when I joined the council was to go and visit every single emergency shelter in Boston to see and hear directly from residents and guests. I think what we're doing today is important, and we need to keep that conversation going way beyond election day, because Those solutions are here. And you think about Operation Clean Sweep, we know when we heard from residents that was very destabilizing, not the right action.
As we look at this housing crisis, we see that we are rapidly becoming a city of haves and have-nots. We have been rapidly growing as a city, but that has not benefited everyone across the city. When we're talking about affordable housing, yes, we need to talk about how are we defining affordability and whether we do that by neighborhood, by census tract, but clearly the way that we do it now is not appropriate, particularly to the very low income housing. In addition, we have to see, just putting someone in a home does not solve the homelessness crisis. Because oftentimes, the reasons why we are not in a home has to do with undiagnosed mental health issues, has to do with substance abuse issues, violence prevention issues, domestic violence. And so just putting someone in a home and saying, here, you have a roof over your head is not enough. What are the services that we maintain for that person and that family so that they're able to not just survive, but actually thrive in their new home?
The City Council has done great work in this space, but we could always do more. I've led efforts to increase the linkage formula, to increase more money for affordable housing and for job creation and training. I've led efforts on the Community Preservation Act and served as its chair, which allows us to send millions to the creation of affordable housing. Councilor Anissa Rasabi-George has done great work in her leadership on the Committee on Homeless, Hunger, and Opioid Crisis. Councilor Wu passing the Airbnb legislation will direct $5 million to affordable housing. We all collectively as a City Council have passed the Jim Brooks Stabilization Act to protect folks from eviction, and we continue to fight to protect our Boston public housing stock as a product of public housing, and the fact that Washington has walked away and abandoned our public housing. It's the City Council working with our mayor that's created public-private partnerships to restore those units and to add to our public housing stock. And I'd be remiss if I don't mention that we lost an icon, we lost a hero for public housing, and a real champion. That was Bill McGonigal, who passed away early this morning. So sad to have to note that, but someone that's been a champion for housing, specifically public housing in the city of Boston. No one's done more work in that space than Bill McGonigal, and we lost him first thing this morning. So, thank you.
So we are in the epicenter of Operation Clean Sweep and its repercussions. Recently, the city outlined a plan to increase outreach workers and policing in the area. While these plans may bring additional support, there is a pretty great demand for additional beds and services to people actually experiencing homelessness. How would you rebuild community trust and improve services for persons experiencing homelessness and addiction in the area? And let's start with Councilor Flaherty.
This is the space, obviously, we can and need to do more, just from the folks that are in this room and the organizations that you represent in your constituency. So those are things we need to continue to work. If we sit around and we wait for the Long Island shelter to be built, which conservatively and factoring in litigation, we're probably talking 6 or 7 years. That's too late. We need to do better. We need to do that now. So clustering does not seem to be working. We have great partners here in the city, particularly our community health centers, the existing shelters, obviously like Rosie's, finding additional space. I know there's people in this room that have great ideas, whether it's a school that is closed or we have a community center that is in need of repair, or it could be a conduit for folks to come in off the street to provide housing and also provide job creation. The fact, when I mentioned in my opening, is that we have an opportunity gap here. We have lots of things, lots of positive things going on in our city. We boast of the best colleges, universities, the best hospitals, and community health network, community health center. We can and must do better in this space.
Yes.
Do you mind repeating the question?
Sure. So we're in the middle of Operation Clean Sweep and its repercussions, and we are asking, how would you help rebuild the community trust and improve services for persons experiencing homelessness and addiction in the area?
Okay, thank you. So I think one movement that has been good in terms of, as we think about drug addiction and treatment, is the move away from criminalization of drug addiction and seeing it as a public health crisis. And we need to continue to put that at the forefront, that people who are experiencing drug addiction are people first. They don't need to be swept. They don't need to be cleaned. They are people first. So as we look at what are the services that they need, we need to look at, one, how is treatment and recovery, also harm reduction. Those that are currently battling addiction, how are we keeping them safe? And how are we keeping the community around them safe as well? And then lastly, and I'm going to go back to the same answer I had about putting a home over someone's head. It's not enough just to say, okay, you're recovered, go find a home, or here's a home. It's done because it's the issues that brought you to your drug addiction, whether that be trauma, whether that be mental health, whether that be experiences in your life. Those need to be treated first. And above everything else, people first. People-centered solutions and around people-centered problems. Thank you.
I completely agree with that. If the question is, how do we go about building trust? The short answer is we have to earn it. Right? And there's been a big disconnect between how government sometimes decides things, and we're going to go through and use law enforcement rather than coming from the angle of support, public health, and the approach that really Rosie's Place is so special for. The reason why I interned here and have been on the board here is because there's something about Rosie's Place that we need to take and expand everywhere. That at the foundation, it's about treating every person with the dignity, respect, support, and love to allow them to flourish. And so if we're thinking about Operation Clean Sweep and how that should have gone instead, residents on the street are resilient above all else and know what they need. And it's about supporting and partnering with the organizations like Rosie's Place and with healthcare providers to go and partner together from that angle as opposed to trying to criminalize and sweep people away.
So I believe that nothing about us without us is for us, right? And oftentimes when we're not at the table, we usually end up on the menu. And this is what, for me, why I believe we need to create a community-centered approach to addressing all of the issues that we're leading with in the city of Boston, so that it comes from those who are living the realities and doing the work, informing every decision that we make. Across my campaign office, I witnessed, alongside with my 9-year-old daughter, someone overdosing. And we didn't know what to do. And so our big response was to conduct a Narcan training, but that should not be a Band-Aid to how we deal with this crisis. I believe that Operation Sweep was inhumane and reflects the values of what this city really thinks about the people. And I think that this is an opportunity, right, for us to hold the city accountable to doing things in a way that's not going to disregard our most vulnerable. And as an advocate and as someone who has worked in this community for the last 25 years, I know that we could do better.
I think we always have to remember that mental health, addiction, homelessness, trauma, they're all intertwined, and we need to treat everyone compassionately and kind. I have a personal story close to me about addiction and recovery. My son struggled for many years with addiction. Oftentimes would find him, his younger brothers and sisters would find him overdosed. Finally, after years, he found his way to detox on Long Island, but he was on Long Island the night the bridge closed 5 years ago. So he was interrupted. He was brought home in a cab. He was later found his way to the Gavin house. He was lucky, but I saw and he knew that many people ended up dying because of that, and we see it all the time. Since then, I've been working closely with the Gavin Foundation and the South Boston Health Center and really trying to find compassionate ways to help people. And Operation Clean Sweep was, I think, another example of when the city waits for things to explode or the media's on it, so they have to just react. And we need to think and come up with solutions so that we're treating everyone humanely and that we come up with real long-term solutions for everyone. Thank you.
The way that I would handle this problem is the city of Boston own a lot of vacant buildings. They could give those buildings to nonprofits, to places like Rosie's Place, to build affordable housing on assignments. Other things that I think is very important, as the Vice President of Upper Corner Health Center, health centers also treat addiction, and if there was more money from these health centers, I believe that the health centers could treat more than what they're doing now. Thank you.
We're talking about addressing this issue, providing services. We have to remember that it's a continuum of care. It's not just Rosie's Place. It's not just the city. It's not just BMC. It's all of us working hand in glove with one another. Previous to this race, I worked at the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, and 90% of the people who came through our doors had some issue relative to either substance abuse, mental health, and often both. And so it's making sure that we're also thinking about those individuals who are engaged in reentry into our communities, making sure that they have opportunities, but making sure that we're talking about the totality of those opportunities. So making sure that we're finding job opportunities, particularly supporting our small businesses, because those are often the ones that reach out and provide people with those chances, those second chances that can keep them from going back behind bars. And in the case of those individuals dealing with addiction, sometimes that can really be the difference between life or death. Making sure that we're scaling up those organizations that are doing good work in our communities, giving them the kind of resources that they need, because it's so critical, and being more creative and thinking outside the box. So when we're talking about pilot agreements, organizations, particularly our colleges and universities, maybe using some of their spaces in the summer to house people who are in need in safe, secure facilities as well, and provide them with more access to treatment.
We all know that people are suffering across our city in every single one of our neighborhoods. And this is a question and a conversation about resources and how we're allocating resources across this city and really across this region, because Boston is feeling the brunt of the crisis of addiction, the crisis of homelessness, the crisis of trauma, the crisis of poverty. And we need to continue to remain focused on these issues and making sure that we're providing and doubling down on the services we are providing, but also leaning on our neighboring cities and towns who are walking away from the challenges that their residents are facing, and Boston is picking up the slack for. We see that in the quality and the lack of quality of services that are provided at Woods Mullen, for example, and I read a little bit of that letter that you've shared earlier this morning. We see that in the lack of quality of services that are provided at Southampton Street Shelter for men. And we need to, as a city, refocus on this issue and hold our neighboring cities and towns and the state legislature accountable for the services that they haven't provided residents across the Commonwealth.
So this is actually a very good segue into the question.
Before we go on to the next, I just want to add something for you guys. I've never, first one,
We do need to continue just because we have only 15 minutes for the last two questions. We have tools.
I'll be quick, 1 minute. Thank you. Just so I've never had a chance to actually vote, and I'm listening to you guys. What is the ultimate plan in the city to help guys that are coming home, not only that are homeless, but guys that are coming home from the prison system that are facing homelessness?
Sir, we do need to continue. Please get up and hand over the mic. Okay, we have tools such as the Neighborhood Jobs Trust, the Boston Residents Job Policy Plan, and anti-discrimination laws to ensure racial, gender, age, and regional job equity. Yet, far too many women, people of color, and older workers are not experiencing today's economic boom. What policies, specific policies, will you promote to ensure economic success for all the Boston residents, including the marginalized? Let's start with the counselor, Asaibi George. So pass down the mic.
So I think that your question there about economic opportunity actually falls really in line with the question that this gentleman asked about any of our returning residents in the city of Boston. And economic opportunity is something that we have to be focused on, and we have to start when our children are young and making sure that they're getting the academic opportunities so that they're prepared for career in college after graduation, that we're doing the work through our schools, and I've played a leadership role as chair of the Committee on Education around the efforts that we're doing at Madison Park to make sure that we have a trained workforce for graduation, a trained workforce for additional training, whether it be college or whether it be specialized programs. We need to make sure that there are opportunities for those that are returning citizens that have been incarcerated, that there are Corey-friendly opportunities both in the workforce and in training for the workforce for those individuals.
So I think that it's about empowering and enabling our residents here across the city to make sure that there are job opportunities on our city jobs, whether it be trades, whether it be private industry, whether it be skilled labor, in any of the institutions that are here in the city of Boston.
So I think in terms of providing job opportunities, particularly for groups that have been marginalized, it's a couple things. The first is, and I say this as a board member for East Boston Main Streets, we have to support our small businesses. Because as I was saying earlier, they provide opportunities, particularly for those individuals who are facing re-entry, amongst other challenges, to getting gainful employment. That's why I've been promoting a change in how we talk about our pilot agreements and using that to incentivize our colleges, universities, our big institutions to do their procurement through small businesses and making it more so that they can target it towards minority businesses, women's owned businesses, veterans owned businesses, whatever those things are. But another piece of it is we can't ask organizations to do these things if we're not willing to do them ourselves as a city. And so there are hundreds of millions of dollars that the city spends in procurement every year. And as we know, as the reports have come out, and to the good work of many on this panel as well, those opportunities aren't coming to Black and brown communities. Those opportunities aren't coming to women-owned businesses. So if we're not setting up the technical supports to make sure that those businesses have access to the capital and the resources and the job opportunities that the city is providing, we're not doing it, and we're abandoning our moral authority on that issue.
I would like to say that as Vice President of Upper Corner Health Center, we are already addressing joblessness. We employ over 330 full-time employees at the health center. And we constantly are looking for work, qualified workers that are qualified, that can work in the health center. We're constantly looking for employees. So I think the first thing, you have to be very honest with yourself and be honest with the public as well and do the right thing. So I think Upper Corner Health Center is already addressing the homeless problem, and we don't discriminate. We are all different types of people. Thank you.
So I think education is key to help people out of poverty, so we need to fully fund our Boston Public Schools. That's where many of our low-income families go. They don't always get a seat at a charter school or obviously have the money to pay for a private school, so we should be absolutely 100% fully funding our public schools in making sure that arts and athletics and trades are not extra, that they're part of every curriculum, because not every child is or should be going to an exam school, and there's this stigma in Boston that that's the only option. That's a good one, and the other high schools, as many of us know, are failing our children. So education is key. And also, along with the stigma, making sure we're finding ways in neighborhoods to get people to know to sign up for the cadet program for the police or the fire, or to get into the union jobs, which are great paying jobs. When it comes to the percentage of women and minorities who have city jobs, which is a ridiculously low percentage, we have to look at the waiver process. It seems as though 100% of the time, if a company applies for a waiver, it gets approved, so we need to be more transparent with that. Thank you.
You know, the sad reality is that we have young people who are competing for the same jobs that their parents are trying to get, right? So we need to acknowledge the fact that we don't have enough jobs, and if we do have jobs, they're not paying people living wages, so that we don't have to work 2 to 3 jobs just to put food on the table. I think that it's really an opportunity for us to look at, if you drive down Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, I always quote those, but there's also a Hyde Park and other parts of the city where we have a lot of empty storefronts. They keep those doors closed. We have an opportunity to incentivize those owners to open up their doors and allow entrepreneurs to incubate in their spaces, right? And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about housing instability. You cannot talk about economic opportunities if you don't have a place to lay your head, right? So let's keep it real that we have to talk about housing first so that people can actually have an address to put on their application. So let's make sure that we, don't forget that piece. And the last piece is that when we talk about minority businesswomen owner contracts that the city of Boston have doled out, let's also include people who are re-entry citizens. Let's include our LGBTQ communities. Let's open up when we talk about minority and redefine which minorities are we talking about, so it's not just women and people of color.
And this question is so important because access to opportunity and jobs and work is really the foundation of so many other issues that the community is grappling with. I was talking before we started with some amazing women who mentioned that their top priority was public safety. Discutimos la importancia de la seguridad pública y la conexión con el empleo y la oportunidad, the connection between public safety and the access that youth in the community might have and that residents in the community might have. The reality is that Boston has lots of jobs. We have jobs that are going unfilled in all of our big institutions, like hospitals, universities, etc., and downtown, but we're not reaching out into the community to make sure they're filled by Boston residents who need those jobs, and that we're creating that connection with training programs. So I think that is on the city, and as Dave was saying before, whether it's in the $664 million that the city spends every year, totally discretionary, that we control, less than 1% going to Boston residents right now, less than 1% going to people of color, and we need to fix that.
I see the issue of jobs as a hugely important one as we talk about affordability, as we talk about stabilization. One is the City of Boston ordinance to have more contracts go to women of color and people of color owned women and people of color owned businesses. I think there's also policies in place like the Boston Jobs Residency Program, which are on the books, but we need to be much stronger in enforcing them. We need to make sure that we are required that our contractors have a certain number of Boston residents, certain number of people of color, certain number of women working on there, and they're not doing that, then we're holding them accountable and making sure that they're paying the sanctions that they owe. We need to make sure that as developers and organizations come into our city, we have just in the mile around, the radius around Dudley Square, there's about 1,100 new units that are coming in. And with that will bring a lot of jobs. We need to ensure that those are good paying jobs and that the city has strong oversight and is using their muscle to say, Boston residents deserve Boston jobs, and they deserve Boston jobs that will allow them to stay and live in dignity with their families.
This is the opportunity gap I talked about in the opening, in that I'm going to continue to support programs in departments like the Office of New Bostonians to make sure that people have the information and it's culturally and linguistic sensitive. Continue to support things that uplift the economy, Boston residency job policy, core reform. And as we talk about moving our city forward, and particularly around environment and climate resiliency issues, there's a whole new green sector job opportunity that's opening up. We have a responsibility to connect folks, and that's through education and also through that linkage fund that I've mentioned a couple times, through the job training program. That is a real program and there's real money behind it. Folks should be taking advantage of it. And finally, obviously, when you access that opportunity or when you learn about that opportunity, we need to have public transportation that allows you to get there safely and on time. And that's a big thing that dogs our city, is that we don't have a transportation system that works for the people that need it when they need it. And that's a big piece of this. That's how we can close the opportunity gap, providing the opportunity, giving folks the information, training them, but also having a transit system that allows you to come and go to work.
All right, so we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask, one, that the audience hold their applause for the end of each of the responses to this final question. 2, that there are no interruptions. You can talk to the candidates after the forum. And finally, I want to start this question with Councillor Flaherty, and we touched upon this earlier. How many 18 to 24-year-olds are experiencing homelessness, and they're struggling to find age-appropriate services, finding themselves too old for some juvenile programs, but out of place in the network of adult homeless services serving a population with the average age of 50 to 60 years old? How would you fill the gap and find solutions for youth at risk of homelessness and those currently experiencing it?
A big piece of that, I think, is from the job creation standpoint, making sure that we have kids, our high school kids and beyond, working year-round, those part-time jobs that sort of fill the gap, if you will, provide opportunity, allow them to get financial literacy skills, And so we need to do a better job of sort of closing that gap. Those individuals are the ones that tend to find mischief if mischief doesn't find them. I've led efforts in my own community. Some folks may know of the Cushing House, which is a treatment facility for women and young adolescent girls ages 16 to 20. We found that in our neighborhood there was a segment that was underserved, if you will. And as mentioned in this question, there's a segment here that maybe be aged out of community centers, but yet doesn't have the educational background and or the opportunity exists for them to move on, and so they're in sort of no man's and no woman's land. And so I think that's an important piece that we as city councilors can work collectively together and also with the administration to find year-round opportunities, whether it's through housing, whether it's through employment, and or educational opportunities. That's why I have a voluntary year 13 proposed for Boston Public Schools, particularly for ELL folks, those folks that are struggling to get through their high school and want to go on to one of the great colleges that call Boston their home.
Saving time.
So, in thinking, going back to my original point is that there are so many issues that are tied up into homelessness, and that are not just about not having a home and not having a job, but looking at what are the underlying impacts of substance abuse, of mental health, untreated mental health disorders, of violence prevention. But as we look at what can we do in that 18 to 24-year-old, I think we need to expand programming, like the Boston Day and Evening program, where you have students who are older who are coming at different times during the day. And then we talk a lot, we have been talking a lot throughout these forums about Madison Park and about the need to make sure that we make that a top of the art voc ed school, because we are in the center of healthcare, we are in the center of technology. There's no reason in the world why Boston should not be leading on that, but there's a place for that to be during the day, and then for your up to your 18-year-old, and then there's a place for that after hours as well. So people between 18 and 24, we shouldn't close the schools at a certain hour and say this is where it stops. Those services, those buildings need to be open around the clock, and they need to be there to provide the services and the job training that people need to have livable wages.
I support all that's been said already, and would just add that we know disproportionately our youth who are experiencing homelessness, a disproportionate number identify as LGBTQ. So I think the statistic is up to 1 out of 3 youth in that age bracket that are experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ. And we know that it is not, these youth face disproportionately higher rates of bullying in school, maybe haven't had family as supportive, and are also not feeling safe to go into shelter. So this is a population that's particularly vulnerable, and I've been proud to work to make sure that we are meeting these youth where they're at, particularly trans youth of color. Last year on National Coming Out Day, we celebrated the opening of Boston's first LGBTQ youth community center, right in downtown Boston, a space that anyone can feel safe to go and not just feel comfortable and safe, but also access services. And so really, when we're talking about youth especially, we need to follow their lead and be training peer leaders and support their outreach.
So I started off my career in youth development, so when it comes to young people, give it up all day, every day. But I think one of the things is that oftentimes we get lost in the conversation, and what we need to realize is that what we are doing is passing down intergenerational poverty from family to family, right? Because this is the real facts of the matter is that we're not talking about poverty. And young people are being passed from place to place and are being provided with the tools and resources that they need, because the fact of the matter is that Boston is resource rich but coordination poor. There are programs throughout the entire city of Boston that has an opportunity to touch young people in many different ways, but yet everybody's working on their own individual silo. So we need to break down those silos, and I think we have an opportunity to do just that. The last thing is that I also want to highlight that there are also a lot of young people who are living in foster care and that are aging out of that system, and because they don't have a family, they don't have a place to go either. So I think that we need to build more housing stock that's specifically geared towards young people 18 to 24.
No clapping, y'all. No clapping, boo.
So
As a mother of 4 who are 20 to 30 years old, I know that this is such a vulnerable age when your children are in high school. My son started struggling with addiction his senior year in high school, so we really were making sure he even graduated. So it's something I know that we need to have age-appropriate, not just jobs. So there's the red shirt jobs in the summer that it seems like who you know, you get that job, but we should have year-round jobs for people in all neighborhoods and making sure we're going in and encouraging people to take these jobs. Also, if you're struggling with addiction, I know Michael mentioned the Cushing House. I've worked with Roger, the principal at Ostagai High, which is the one high school in the city that has children 18 to high school age children who are addicted, and many of them homeless. They may have been kicked out of their home for different reasons. So the Cushing House works closely with Ostagai High, and that's something I would fully support and fund going forward.
I don't know whether you know this or not. Bird Street Youth Center works with youth to keep them out of trouble and find a job. So I think there's a lot of programs already exist. Perhaps the public doesn't know about them, but there's a lot of programs that already exist that address the youth problem. So like my office is open every day, and if anyone call me and want reference to different programs or whatever, I would be glad to give that out to them.
So the first thing we have to do in terms of speaking about this vulnerable age population is let them know that somebody actually cares about them. That's critical, seeing them as real people. Because right now, if you look down the road, we have 2 pathways. If you go to the South Bay House of Correction right now, there's a unit that Sheriff Tompkins set up called the Peace Unit, specifically for individuals who are in that age bracket. It's because we know they're still engaging in cognitive development. And that's why a lot of them are engaging in activities that get them there in the first place. Now, it's wonderful that Sheriff Tompkins set this up and speaking to those specific needs of that group, but it's also a moral failing of our society if we have to set that up. It shouldn't be that people need to find the services they need by being incarcerated, by going behind bars. They should find those services here in our communities. And that's why if you go down the other pathway and look over at the base, I was just talking with Robert Lewis. He was talking about the fact that there are individuals all across the city, people like John Fish and other developers who have jobs out there, but these young people don't know about it. So we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to amplify the voice, to connect those individuals with those opportunities, so that not only are they getting the services that they need, but they're able to establish and have a better life than the one that they left behind.
I think the question is most appropriate because when we talk about the age group, the age range from 18 to 24, these are young people, they're not youth, they are young people. And maybe for us, they're really young. But they are at a pretty critical turning point in their lives because they are most at risk, like David said, to go down that wrong path. Through my office, especially focused on homelessness, a component of that is this age group that is too young for the family shelter and the family unit, still too young for some of the individual units, but too old to be considered children. And that's why my office, in partnership with the mayors, the administration, and D&D, worked to write a grant that we were successful in getting, a $4.9 million grant that's specifically focused on this age group. It's a project where we have people in this age range, young people 18 to 24, working on the projects and the programs that they need developed to support them through homelessness, seeking housing, seeking economic opportunity, seeking employment. And that's critical that we have those with lived experience at the table finding the answers to these problems.
All right, now you can applaud, guys. So, thank you, candidates, for their responses to our questions, for the organizations, the over 8 organizations that formulated these questions. And I just want to remind folks that you can register to vote until next Wednesday, October 16th, and that election day is November 5th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And now, feel free to chat. We're changing over the space to a cafeteria soon, so just be cognizant of that. Thank you so much.